What is the most embarrassing thing you had to tell your parents? When I was 7 or 8, my grandma bought me this pair of jean shorts that were way too small, but she insisted I wear them anyway. Throughout the course of the day, the rubbing of the shorts caused a few cuts and something like rug burn all over my downstairs bits. When I went to pee, of course, it burned like crazy. I had to go to my mum and explain what had happened. It was awful. I once got a bunch of jelly beans for Valentine's Day from my ex-girlfriend. I hate jelly beans. Absolutely think they're the worst tasting things in the world. But I acted like I was grateful and took them home. 4 weeks later, it's 8 p.m. on a Friday and my car broke down. No one could really make it out of my house, so I was sitting in my room bored. So I started tossing jelly beans up and trying to catch them in my ear. Well, after an hour, I got one to land in my ear, like really in my ear. I went to retrieve it and I pushed it in further. So for 30 minutes I tried getting it out, and it kept getting wedged deeper and deeper. So finally I walked upstairs, looked at my mum on the couch and said, "I have a jelly bean stuck in my ear." She blinked and stared for a minute, and then asked, "How old are you?" 16. "I'm going to use this key to try and get that jelly bean out of your ear. If that doesn't work, I'm using it to drive you to the pediatrician since you're a goddamn 4-year-old. She was able to get the jelly bean out after a while. I started a stamp collection when I was 13. I really liked stamps, but nobody mailed me anything and my parents never got any good ones. So I started checking my paper route customers' mailboxes and was able to start a really good collection that way. I hid my collection in the basement because I thought my parents were searching my room. One day, my dad found hundreds of letters addressed to different people in the neighborhood where I hid them behind the Christmas stuff, and he freaked and started yelling at my mum. He said he knew what she was up to and wanted a divorce. I was scared and embarrassed but didn't want my parents to split up, so I confessed to the collection. They made me walk my route and return all the letters while my dad videotaped me. They did split up that year anyway, so I shouldn't have said anything. My dad sent me the videotape for my 30th birthday present with a card that just said, "Good times." Oh my god, you absolute thicko. I think I was a lot younger than 13 before I was finally able to logic out why you shouldn't steal other people's mail. Still, I hope your father allowed you to keep the stamps on the mail you stole. I doubt the recipients were going to keep them anyway. He has a pretty good sense of humor, too. I have to tell mine that I'm having surgery. Circumcision, age 26, because I tore it while doing it in the butt with a woman twice my age. The first time I splooged when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I think I was just rubbing myself on the side of the bed or something, and suddenly I had no idea what was coming out of me. I hadn't learned about this, and just this white stuff dripping out of my gentleman made me freak the frick out. I had no idea if it was natural or something terribly wrong had just happened, and my mum was sleeping, so I woke her up to tell her that some weird white stuff just came out of my wee-wee. Obviously, she was a bit shocked and was trying to hide her laughter. I was a bit confused and she kind of briefly explained what I did and said it was fine and not to worry. I don't think I thought about it too much at the time, but when I was a little older, I realized how I woke my mum up to tell her how I splooged for the first time, and my embarrassment burned like a red-hot poker. When I was 17, I tried to wake my mum up after she'd worked until about 3 a.m. She didn't want to wake up, of course, and then I told her it was because I needed to go to the Planned Parenthood to get the morning after pill, about 17 years ago. And that got her up in a flash. Didn't even ask questions or complain to me. I guess she wasn't ready to be a grandma. I was younger and I didn't really know how to fix the problem, but my number 2 was too big to flush down the toilet, so I had to ask for help. "Oh, come on, just pick it up and break it in half like a man." I was 9 or so and I did number 2 and blood came out, but instead of my mother, my father came. He freaked out thinking that I was having my period too early and ran to call my mom. I had to tell mine that I didn't know what a virgin was. In middle school, I didn't really know a lot about doing the deed, but I sure as crap knew how to tickle my pickle. Anyway, some conversations started at lunch, and if I recall correctly, some kid made fun of a girl because she wasn't a virgin anymore. Somehow I got pulled into it and I said I wasn't either. More questions, with me backpedaling and finally admitting I didn't know what a virgin was. Cue my classmates making fun of me all day. In science class, I wrote a self-deletion note and folded it up. I put "Mom" on it, and put it in my backpack. I got home, went off to karate, and forgot about everything. Mom picks me up and she has the note on her dashboard. Busted. Long story short, we had the talk, and then I had to go with my stepdad to the library and get a educational booklet on doing the deed. The one thing I remember from one of the books was that there were comments every few pages from a cat. One page about girls' periods and tampons had the cat wearing a sombrero with tampons hanging off the hat. The other page shows the cat all proud and him saying he just caught a mouse. Then a look of fear and he says, "Help, I've swallowed a tampon." It was a very strange day. I was an early 20s male and I still had never been in a relationship, nor have I ever had any real discussion come up with my family about my romantic life, in part because I was too embarrassed by it. But that summer, a couple of my friends had recently come out as gay, and I mentioned it to my parents while I was visiting home. Later that night, my mum somehow started on a "we'll love you regardless" sermon. While in a way comforting, it was also embarrassing because there I was, a full-grown 23-year-old man, having his mother openly acknowledge his innocence and effectively tell me she thought I hadn't brought anyone home because I was gay. On top of that, my dad is perhaps a bit more uneasy with homosexuality. He wouldn't kick one of his kids out or disown them for being gay, but I imagine he'd struggle to hide some disappointment. He was there for this conversation and he was visibly tense during it. After he went to bed, I turned off the TV and had a 10-minute conversation with my mum in which I had to explain to her that I was not in fact gay, but simply socially inept. It took 10 minutes because she spent the entire time continuing her "we'd love you regardless" stance. I said, "Mum, I'm straight and you're kind of freaking Dad out." And my mum said, "But if you weren't straight, we'd still love you." That's great, but it's irrelevant because I'm straight. But if it wasn't irrelevant, it'd still be okay. 2 years later, I was finally in a relationship with a girl. In short, I had to come out to my mother as being straight. Well, my mum found my personal toy collection, so there's that. I had to tell my septuagenarian grandparents that I may have given them crabs. My grandmother just decided to get new linens and toilet seats that day, and my grandfather just shrugged it off and said, "I guess I'd better shave it back like I did in Korea." When I got my period for the first time, I sent my mum an email. "Mom, Dad, you're going to want to sit down for this. I'm adopted. I'm bulimic and I can't stop and I need help." I'm sure that isn't what my mum wanted to hear her 24-year-old son tell her. "Mom, why is there a schlong on my bathroom floor?" Apparently, the cat dug a toy out of my parents' hiding place in their bathroom and left it for me to find in my bathroom. The worst part was my mum was saying, "Oh dear God, I hope it's not the two-headed one." So I don't really know who it was more awkward for. I had to admit to my parents that I'd been constipated for a long time. There's no appropriate time to bring that up without being abrupt. Pretty much had to walk into the kitchen and say, "I'm constipated," and let all of the questions ensue. "You're full of crap." I had to tell my mum that I had warts down there because I didn't know what the frick to do about them. I was 19 and just freaking out. Surprise number 1 was that I'd done the deed. Surprise number 2 was that I had not just those warts but also in the butt. So like 2 hours later, when I realized I'd told my mum I had warts in my butt, I was awkwardly like, Mom, it's not because he put it in there." Definitely a moment of oversharing, and I still cringe over this. Well, since so many of you in the comments apparently enjoy hearing about it when it happens, we've officially reached the story that makes the narrator gag. So well done, Warty McButtface. Ugh. Seriously though, not really your fault. I just can't stop thinking about how going number 2 through those must feel. And I've doubled over again. No. Thank you. As an 18-year-old, I had to get my mum's advice on lubricant. Doing the deed was extremely painful and I felt like there was too much traction down there. The conversation was heck of awkward, but she did give me some advice. Not me, but my older brother. Not sure how old he was, and I was just a wee kid. My brother had his first wet dream, and he woke up and noticed the splooge on his wang, and freaked out. Only my grandma was home, while my uncle also came home for a visit. My brother told them directly what happened, and my uncle decided to mess with him and told him he was going to die. My brother freaked out more and started yelling, "I'm gonna die!" I didn't really remember the details, being little at the time. All I remember was my brother seeing something in his pants and yelling that he was gonna die. Nowadays, as adults, my grandma for some reason would keep bringing up that story in family get-togethers right in my brother's face. I also remember her telling this to his wife the first time. On average, I'd hear this story once or twice a year. Every time my sister introduces a new boyfriend home to us, she tells it. Every relative who comes to us, she tells it. Never knew or understand why my grandma would keep telling the story. It wasn't until I was a bit older that I understood the story and I cracked up every time she told it. My friend had to call his mum from the principal's office and tell her he wrote "John Hearts the eggplant" on his own binder. He was trying to get someone else in trouble and then remembered he had a conscience. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had to tell mine that my brother and I could no longer sleep in our bunk beds after he met his hot girlfriend. He had the top bunk and would sneak her home at night after he thought I was asleep. Their motion made the bunk beds rock, and I couldn't stay asleep with the moaning and motion. When I was 16 and I got fired from my job at the supermarket because I stole 2 quarts of ice cream. Or when I was 5 and I stole the entire block of cheese out of the fridge intending to eat the whole thing. I felt sick after about a third and then I hid it behind the bed until it got so smelly I had to tell them to move the bed because it wasn't a mouse in the wall, just cheese. Both were highly embarrassing and upsetting at the time, and I'm realizing after writing this that I apparently have food theft issues. I had to come out to my 90-year-old grandmother, who I was living with, and told her that I was gay in front of her mahjong friends in order to explain my date, during which I lost my shoes and wallet in the woods, and that's why I needed $7 to buy a pair of Goodwill sneakers so I could go to work? I was 24. I was about 6 weeks from my due date when I started bleeding. What the frick? Long story short, everything was fine. I was a smidge dilated, but okay, as was my kiddo. So the OB asks me if, outside of OB appointments, I've inserted anything into my downstairs area or done the deed. I admitted I'd done the deed nearly a week prior, but I wasn't told not to as my pregnancy was progressing just fine. The OB says, okay, that's probably what it was, and advises me to err on the side of caution and refrain a bit. Okay, fine. She leaves to get my discharge papers. My mum is staring daggers into my skull, and I'm seriously like, is there something on my face, mum? And she started screaming about how my then-husband is a jerk, and how dare he make me do the deed, etc., etc., and I was like, Mum, he didn't make me do anything. And she's like, why would you want to? She's simultaneously annoyed, disgusted, mystified, and embarrassed by her pregnant adult daughter having pregnant adult fun 32 weeks gone. Fast forward 4.5 years, my brother's girlfriend is 4 days past her due date, and wouldn't you know it, the first piece of advice to pop out of my mum's mouth was, go do the deed, that'll get her out of there. And I'm like, whoa there, it's okay for her to do it, but I'm an embarrassment? And her response, yes, but this is necessary. You wanted it. Every now and again, she's got her backwards thinking moments. I was back on spring vacation from college. At the time, my girlfriend and I had just split up. I had a one-night stand with a girl I met online. Here's where it gets bad. We were a little drunk and my parents weren't home when I got back. We made our way to the guest room, shedding clothes the whole way. We did the deed and passed out. Apparently my mum collected the trail of clothes and left them outside the door. She also walked past my parents on the way out in the morning. I hadn't woken up yet. Here's where it gets worse. I stupidly had gone bareback. A week or so later, I started to get some concerning symptoms. I had to basically tell my dad that I barebacked some random chick and now I had to go to the doctor because I probably have mega super transmissible diseases. I had a UTI. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to try and repurge that memory from my brain. My mother found a wrapper for a Jimmy in my room. I was trying it on to make sure that I knew what I was doing. I didn't enjoy explaining that to my mother. You know, coming out as trans was pretty bad. It was super cringeworthy, and for the next week, my mom kept making awkward comments about girly stuff, as if to say, wink wink, nudge nudge, you're a girl now. Honestly, my parents both did the exact same thing when I came out to them. But nothing was funnier than when my dad and I were watching the news together, and he was going on about how hot the weatherwoman was when he just stopped and said, Oh yeah, I'm so sorry, I forgot, you're a girl. I told him, yeah, and I've had girlfriends for over a year now. He just stayed silent for a few seconds before mumbling, So you're a lesbian? Telling mine that I had depression and thoughts of self-deletion. I was almost not able to tell them because I didn't want them to worry about me. That I kinda sorta set a gas station on fire. It was really only a couple of gas pumps out by some abandoned garages, and it honestly was an accident, but it was quite embarrassing. Actually, the most embarrassing part was that the guy on the motorcycle who'd seen the fire from the road and came over to put it out escorted me home and made me tell my parents. That was embarrassing, especially since my father was the biker's guidance counselor. Awkward. Well, at least your father had a pretty good indication that he was doing his job right and setting this man on the right tracks to solve problems when he saw them. Good on your dad and the random biker for being such diligent and community-minded souls. I had to explain to mine that the reason I was coming home for the weekend was because my husband had shoved me during an argument. We were together for 10 years before getting married. Mum and Dad both put a lot of money into the wedding. Not a ton of money by normal standards, but a lot of money by our family's standards. I moved home a month later and I'm currently getting divorced. But I'll never forget the dread I felt telling my mum why I was leaving him. I thought I was smarter than that. Yes, we're doing the deed. No, we're not a couple. Telling mine the first time I got a bladder infection, because everyone knows darn well that likely means inexperienced deed-doing. Went out rollerblading the one time. I had to come home and tell my parents I was gay. When I asked mine, "What's your first name?" Coming out to my parents as a drag queen. It didn't go too badly. My dad accepted it better than when I told him I was bi, but the subsequent question and answer session was awkward as heck. I was messing around with inserting things while flicking the bean. When I was about 12, all of a sudden I feel a ripping sensation and blood comes pouring out. I freaked out and had to tell my mum that I was doing it with a magic marker. She just laughed at me. She likes to bring that one up at random family dinners 10 years later. Fun times. The neck massager she found in my room was actually a massager for a different thing. Just kidding, I never told her. Screw that. When I told mine I was dating an Indian girl. This hasn't happened yet, but I'd surely be screwed if my mum sees the things that I linked on Reddit. This happened to me when I was in 8th standard. I was painfully awkward near girls, hence I never had the guts to talk to my crush about my feelings. My crush was extremely smart, rated over smart by my mum, active and vivacious. Of course, she was cute. My mum was aware of my infatuation with her because she had once discovered a Valentine's Day card in my bag, which I'd planned to give her but couldn't. My mum wasn't very happy with that since, according to her, I should focus myself on making myself a better person rather than engaging in meaningless pursuits, and she actually blamed my crush for that. Probably she was just jealous because my crush was much more accomplished than I was. So one day, my crush calls me and I pick up the landline. My heart was already in my mouth. I tried to act cool and was talking to her. Somehow, my mum, call it her sixth sense or my apparent excitement over the phone, comes to know who I'm talking to. My crush says, "So, have you done the assignment yet? Actually, I've lost my notebook and I was wondering if you had seen it." "No, I haven't completed the assignment. Sorry to hear that. Where did you—" Then suddenly, "Why are you talking to that girl? I told you to stay away from her. Put the phone down now," came my mum's shrill voice behind me. I was so freaked out and embarrassed that I put the phone down that instant. I didn't have the guts to call her back. I had a big fight with my mum and sulked all day. The next day, I got to go to my crush and apologize to her about the matter. She handled it very well. The day after that, my mum invited her over to our house to make up for it. She felt guilty about it too, but things were never the same between me and my crush again, and we barely talked. Needless to say, she never called me again. I was 5 or 6 years old, playing in my room, trying to squeeze into small spaces to make my secret hiding place. I did not know how boy and girl bits worked. As I was crawling under the bed, halfway under, my little Johnson snuck into itself. I ran out of there as fast as I could and I started frantically telling both my parents, who were watching the news in the living room, that my wee-wee had disappeared. They started laughing, and even to this day, 22 years later, the story does not cease to be told at family parties. I crashed my Cherokee into a concrete barrier. Okay, well, maybe not crashed, but more like firmly bumped. I was driving home late one night in winter. It had done that weird thing where it rained just enough to put a sheen on the road, and they hadn't even thrown out the salt just yet. So long story short, I took an S-bend a little too tight, spun out, and hit the concrete barrier head-on. Hard enough to send everything in the back seat onto my lap and lurch the passenger seat into the glove box. Also hard enough to cause enough cosmetic damage to pinch the hood shut and dent the passenger side quarter panel. Hardly noticeable if you didn't look too hard. The old dog stalled because I let the clutch out, but started back up and got me back home. I wasn't going to tell my parents until the whiplash set in 2 days later and I couldn't turn my head. I went to them crying that my head was stuck because I crashed my old Jeep. I was expecting a talking to and I got laughed at instead. Seriously? The car looks fine. Are you okay though? We pulled out the dings with a hand winch, a sledgehammer, and a crowbar. Everything in the engine bay was perfectly fine, thanks to a huge bull bar that I had in the front. I went to the chiropractor, and life continued. Sadly, I had to sell that old dinosaur a couple of months ago for something newer. Probably not the safest car in terms of no airbags, and it was built in '89, but still the best car I'd ever had. I was 18, and it was Christmas night. I started getting really sick. Some kind of stomach virus, and I thought I was dying. Ended up crapping in the bed. It was very awkward when I woke up at 6 a.m. in wet boxers and waddled into my parents' room to tell them. I've had to tell mine that I've been going through the divorce from hell for the last 2 years. I thought it was embarrassing when I had to tell my dad about it 2 years ago, but I've more or less run through my savings, so tomorrow I need to call him and ask if I can borrow money to pay my attorney fees and alimony. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.